Today, I am excited to share with you a vocabulary activity that I absolutely love. Super, super successful in my classroom and very fun and engaging for students. It is called Tic Tac Tell. To start with Tic Tac Tell, you need a word list. You can create the word list yourself from vocabulary words from the textbook or from a unit of study. You can let students create the word list. And you can also try a challenge of using images instead of a word list. I'm going to show you several examples of different variations of how this game can be played in different subject areas with student generated, teacher generated, and image based lists. After you have your list, then students play the game. They play with a partner, they can play digitally using a Google Jamboard or Google Slides, and they can also do paper and pencil version. After they play the game and they have a winning 3 words in a row, they write a paragraph, or you can have them do sentence instead. They will either explain connections between the words, they could be summarizing, or they could be identifying a word that doesn't belong in the group. Finally, you get to the last step where they share their thinking. They share their paragraphs with the class, and then I would give them a little bit of time to revise their paragraph after sharing to submit it. Let's take a look. These are the different steps for the lesson in paper and pencil versus digital. It's basically the same. The only difference is mostly that to work with a partner in a digital format, you would need to use the breakout room feature in your Zoom or Google Meet, whatever you use, to put 2 students in a group together in a separate room. So, because there's a lot of talking involved in this activity, and you wouldn't want everybody out in a main room all talking at the same time. And the nice thing about that too is if you use the Jamboard and the Google Meet version, you can also use the Jamboard digital version in an in-person classroom too. That's totally fine to do. I like to do that because when walking around the classroom, I can only see the students that I'm close to. I can see their work. I can't see what the students on the other side of the room are doing. And if we're doing it digitally, I can click on the thing to see everybody's work all at the same time. So I know which students I should go near and support them a little bit more. For creating the word lists, you can have teacher selected word lists, and there are some suggestions here for different ways you could come up with the words. Or you can do student generated word lists. And I'm going to show you a couple of really fun activities for learning the lesson with student generated word lists. You can also do images instead of words, and this can be a very interesting way to do it. I'll show you an example that's really cool. But let's start with just the basic words and paragraph. This is an example in Google Slides, and there were X's and O's out in the gray space on the slide. This was from a ancient India in my history class. I teach ancient world history. And these were just the vocabulary words from that lesson in the textbook. I'll show you some examples of how some of the paragraphs that my students did turned out. They're quite good. This is from ancient Egypt. So you can see we did this every time. They got very good at it. But this was actually their first time doing it. And I didn't start with easy, easy. We just went right into hard because I always seem to forget to start with easy, easy. But it turned out fine. The winning words were tomb, scribe, status. And this is a student that I worked with because we had an odd number and they didn't have a partner. The scribe was of a higher status than many other Egyptians. And since they had a higher status, they had nicer things in their tombs. I won't read the whole thing, but you can see we used tomb, scribe, and status in our paragraph talking about what we learned about ancient Egypt. Here is another example: Pharaoh, linen, and polytheism. Pharaoh is a ruler of ancient Egypt. When the pharaoh dies, it gets mummified. While the pharaoh is getting mummified, they use linen to wrap the mummy up, which shows that pharaoh and linen can be connected. Now, this is an example of a paragraph where I would want them to do some revising before they submitted it. And this is also incorporating your ELA standards into history lessons as well. And I did a whole lot of that because I taught both subjects. And so a lot of our lessons were ELA and history at the same time. This example is Pharaoh mummy succession. This is one of the better examples from the class. Pharaohs in Egypt became mummies when they died. People turned them into mummies so that they could go into the afterlife. After the pharaoh died, they had to decide who would be the next pharaoh. They decided this with succession, which means the next person to inherit the throne. You can really see how much the students have learned about whatever the topic is. In this case, it was ancient Egypt, based on the paragraph that they write. Here is another example. I'm not going to read all of these, but I wanted to share a bunch of different examples so you could see that I didn't just pick and choose the very best ones. This one was from ancient China, and it was respect, Confucianism, filial piety. And they said, you have to show respect to get respect. Respect was very important in Confucianism. Filial piety was showing respect for elderly and your parents. There was 5 relationships you had to live by. If you show and give respect in relationships, you will live in harmony. That's an excellent example. And I can see that they learned the concepts that they were supposed to be learning during that chapter. Here is an example of how to use this same strategy with character traits in your ELA lessons. You can give them a list of character traits and have them fill in the board with character traits that they think apply to the main character or any character in the reading. Or you can let the students fill in the board. Don't give them a word bank and let them just go straight to filling in the board, taking turns with a character trait, writing it on the board. And then they play the game and they write a paragraph where they discuss the 3 character traits, giving examples for how the character behaved, what they said, etc., that showed those traits in the text. As you repeat this lesson with vocabulary words, try to level up slowly using shorter word lists, student-generated word lists, or I'm going to show you an example with a short video that's highly engaging that has student-selected word lists. This is what it looks like. In my history class, I love using these music videos.
About ancient Mesopotamia, the Euphrates River and the Tigris River formed the cradle of civilization.
Super engaging for the students. They love these videos. You can find them. It's Mr. Nicky and also the history teachers. Both have channels on YouTube with tons of history songs, and I use them all the time. I know there are songs out there for science and math, etc., but these are just the ones that I use because I was teaching history. What you would do is have the students listen to the song. As they're listening, they would select words, and it's nice because they all have captions down below, writing words on their Tic Tac Tell board. It is a good way for students to practice determining importance by having them select the words. And if they select words that are not very important, then the summarizing of what this song was communicating to us becomes a little bit challenging because they didn't use three words that were important. But for this one, I would do a summarizing paragraph afterwards. So summarize, what did you learn in this song using the three words that you had on your Tic Tac Tell board. Here's a modified version if you want to make it a little bit easier for some of your students. What you would do, instead of giving them a Tic Tac Tell board, you would just go straight to three concepts. And instead of a paragraph, they would look at those three concepts and identify two that they could connect. So instead of writing a paragraph with three words and explaining how they're connected, they only have to select two words or concepts and explain how they're connected in a sentence that is kind of already scaffolded for them. Start with a low cognitive load. Allow students time to learn the procedure for doing the activity before you start leveling up with bigger word lists, more challenging words, words from a text, etc. And another way to make it simpler, if technology is going to be something that makes it more of a challenge for them, start with a tic-tac-tell on paper without technology. It just depends on your class. But if your students don't have a lot of experience using technology and you do this in a digital way, it adds another layer of distracting from what it is they're supposed to be learning and showing, because now they have this frustration of these words are too hard and I don't know how to run this tech. Here is an example of starting with something high interest, non-academic, low cognitive load, and student generated list. So I would have them come up with things that would be on a pizza toppings. Then they play tic-tac-tell, and then they write a paragraph talking about which one has to go. That was another activity we did. One must go, or which one has to go. A great activity to get students talking and supporting their claims with reasoning. So when they explain that pineapples has to go because fruit does not belong on pizza, they're supporting their reasons. Here is an example of doing that same thing, but leveling it up and making it academic. Still, one of them has to go. Their tic-tac-tell board would have been filled in with Mesopotamian inventions. And this is also from history class. So the three winning words were put here. And instead of writing a paragraph, so we're still leveling up, but academic now, but still a little bit easier. Calendar, wheel, writing. That was their three terms. And then if one had to go, it would have to be blank because, and they would have to explain what it would be like to live without that item and why it's the least important of the group. When we did this activity, a lot of my kids said calendar. Could not have calendar. Here is another example with using images. And I like this because it kind of has to do with a little bit of word association, and there's room for kind of, that could be a towel on the beach, but it could stand for a lot of different things. So it gives them a whole lot of flexibility. And this one was an example of to write a paragraph about something you did over the summer. Also, with using those images instead of words, that would be a great activity if you were a language teaching class. And this wasn't a lesson that I did because I don't teach foreign language, but another teacher who I'd shared this activity with did this and then shared back to me what their students had done. And I thought, wow, that's also a really cool way to use this in a language class. Here's an example where they just did sentences, not paragraphs. So we're still leveling up with a low cognitive load. And they had emojis on their Tic Tac Tell board. And they had to write a sentence that either highlights a pro or a con of distance learning. And your sentence had to include all three emojis. That was a fun one. The stuff that the students wrote there were quite entertaining. Here is an example of having them do forced connections. So the topic here was different types of agricultural or farming techniques in ancient civilizations. And they had to explain. So once they had their tic-tac-tell, their winning 3 terms, they put their terms here and explain how do these terms connect to agricultural techniques. Here's an example of how you could do it with a presentation. If students are doing a book talk, you could have the class mark off on their tic-tac-tell board. Instead of doing it X's and O's, they would just mark it off. And when they have 3 in a row, they could write a paragraph talking about the characters, the point of view, the language, or theme, point of view, conflict that the student who was giving the book talk mentioned. So this is a good way to kind of keep students engaged during class presentations that are done by their peers. What standards are students mastering when they're working on this? The base standards here would be to prepare for and participate in a range of collaborative discussions with diverse partners, building on other people's ideas, expressing their own ideas clearly and persuasively, and also acquire and use grade appropriate academic and domain specific words and phrases. So depending on how you set this up and what types of terms you use, what types of paragraphs you have them write, these are the very base standards that they're working on, but they could be working on even more standards than just this, depending on how you structure your tic-tac-tell activity and the writing that comes afterwards. That's it for tic-tac-tell. I hope you liked it. If you did, please subscribe to my channel. My new website will be live by the end of June, and you should definitely check that out. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching.